The grand hall of the auction house held its breath, every eye fixed on the woman commanding the stage. Her smile was flawless, her voice like honeyed silk. "Would the representative for paddle number 88 please join us on stage?" she called out, her tone radiating the sweet triumph of a queen who had just won a war. The crowd turned, expecting to see a man in a sharp suit rise from the front row. Instead, from the shadows in the very back, a stooped elderly man in a worn wool coat began to walk down the long aisle. Whispers of confusion rippled through the room. But with every step he took, his posture began to change. The tired slump straightened into a powerful, unyielding line. The timid shuffle became a measured, silent stride of immense authority. When he finally ascended the stage, he was no longer a ghost. He was a titan. "What is the meaning of this?" the woman demanded, her voice tight with disbelief. The man looked at her, his eyes holding a cold, ancient calm, and took the microphone. His voice, now a deep and resonant baritone, silenced the entire room with 5 words. "My name is Marcus Thorne." He let the name, a name of legend, of mythical wealth and power, hang in the air for a beat before delivering the final devastating blow. "And I am the owner of this building, and until a few moments ago, your employment." The silence that followed was no longer respectful. It was the sound of a world shattering. To see how a quiet old man brought an empire to its knees, and the dark secret he uncovered, make sure you like this video and subscribe for the full story. The air in the grand hall of the Vance Sovereign Auction House didn't circulate so much as it marinated. It was a thick, intoxicating blend of old money, expensive perfume, and the kind of quiet, predatory ambition that could only be found where legacies were bought and sold under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Here, silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with the weight of numbers of whispered histories and calculated futures. Into this cathedral of earthly treasures walked a ghost. He called himself Arthur Finch, a name as worn and unassuming as the grey wool coat draped over his shoulders. The coat was a size too large, its fabric softened by years of use, not by the gentle hands of a bespoke tailor. He moved with a slight, almost apologetic stoop, his gaze directed downward, as if the intricate marble floor were more interesting than the museum-quality paintings that adorned the walls. He was an anomaly, a misspelled word in a perfectly penned poem of opulence, and he felt the shift in atmosphere his presence caused. It was a subtle thing, a fractional pause in a conversation, a sidelong glance from a waiter holding a silver tray of champagne flutes, the quiet tightening of posture from the room's occupants. They didn't see a man, they saw a problem of context. This was precisely the effect Marcus Thorne had intended. Underneath the carefully constructed persona of Arthur Finch, the reclusive billionaire was a hunter, and this gilded cage was his hunting ground. He was here to find the rot that had infested one of his most prized and most secret acquisitions. He made his way to the main reception desk, a formidable block of polished black marble that seemed to have been carved from the night sky itself. Behind it stood Isabella Vance, the auction house's executive director and the architect of its recent spectacular success. She was a masterpiece in her own right, sculpted by ambition and tailored by Dior. Her blonde hair was swept into a chignon, so precise it might have been engineered, and her smile was a brilliant, sterile thing, reserved for those whose net worth could be measured in the millions. When her eyes landed on Marcus, the smile didn't vanish, but it was hollowed out, leaving behind only the polite, dismissive shell. "May I help you, sir?" Her voice was smooth, cultured, but carried an undertone of condescension as sharp as a shard of glass. Marcus offered a timid, almost weary smile. "Yes, my name is Arthur Finch. I believe I'm registered for this evening's auction." Isabella's perfectly manicured fingers tapped on a sleek, embedded touchscreen. Her eyes scanned the list, and a flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, or mild disgust, crossed her face before being smoothed over by years of practice. As she looked at him, her gaze traveling from his worn leather shoes to his frayed collar, Marcus fought the urge to smile. Her expression was so transparently disdainful, he had the distinct internal thought, "She's looking at me as if my coat personally insulted her entire lineage." "Ah, yes. Mr. Finch," she said, finally, her tone suggesting she had located a particularly stubborn piece of lint on a cashmere sweater. "Your paddle is number 278. You'll find our main catalogue over there." She gestured vaguely with a sweep of her hand toward a distant table, her attention already drifting to a more promising-looking couple dripping with diamonds who had just approached. The dismissal was absolute. She had weighed, measured, and discarded him in less than 30 seconds. As Marcus turned the sting of the fabricated slight, a familiar tool in his arsenal, a young man in the crisp, simple uniform of an intern hurried toward him. He couldn't have been more than 22, with earnest blue eyes, and a face yet to be molded by the cynicism of the world he was working in. On his chest, a simple name tag read, "Leo." "Sir Mr. Finch," the young man said, his voice a welcome note of genuine warmth in the chilly air. He was holding out a thick, glossy catalogue. "I saw you at the desk. I thought I might bring this to you. And would you care for some water? It can get rather warm in the main hall." Marcus paused, taken aback for a genuine moment. He looked at the boy, at the simple, uncalculated act of kindness. It was a glass of water in a desert of arrogance. "Thank you, son," Marcus said, his Arthur voice softening with a note of real gratitude. "That's very thoughtful of you." "Of course," Leo said with a quick, bright smile. "It's my job to help. Enjoy the auction. There are some truly remarkable pieces tonight." He handed Marcus the catalogue and a bottle of chilled water before respectfully backing away, his duty done. Marcus watched him go, a strange feeling settling in his chest. In his world, kindness was a currency, rarer and more valuable than any painting on these walls. It was often a prelude to a request, a down payment on a future favor. But the boy had wanted nothing. He had simply seen a man who looked like he could use a helping hand. He found an empty seat in the back of the grand auction hall, a shadowy alcove that offered a perfect view of the stage and the sea of wealth before it. He didn't open the catalogue. He didn't need to. He knew every piece, every forged brushstroke, every falsified document of provenance. He was here for one piece in particular, the crown jewel of Isabella's elaborate deception. He settled in a predator disguised as a lamb, and let the quiet hum of the room wash over him, his focus sharpening to a razor's edge. He was a ghost, yes, but ghosts had the power to haunt. And tonight, he intended to bring this entire glittering house down. The auction was a symphony of quiet avarice, each wave of the auctioneer's gavel a percussive beat in a dance of ego and acquisition. Hours passed. Marcus remained still, a statue of patient observation, until finally the moment arrived. The lights dimmed slightly, and a single breathtaking painting was brought to the stage on a velvet-draped easel. And now the auctioneer's voice boomed the final piece of the evening, a recently discovered masterwork, The Dreamer's Dusk. A reverent hush fell over the crowd. This was the painting that had been whispered about in galleries from New York to London for months. As Marcus stared at the canvas, a perfect, brilliant forgery, he felt a presence beside him. It was Leo the intern, his shift apparently over, but his fascination with the art keeping him there. "It's incredible, isn't it, Leo?" whispered, his eyes wide with awe. Marcus nodded slowly, not taking his eyes off the painting. "It is. he agreed, his voice a low murmur. The boy was silent for a long moment, his head tilted. Then he spoke again, his voice barely audible, filled with a strange, intuitive certainty that sent a jolt through Marcus's very core. "It's beautiful," Leo said, his brow furrowed in thought, "but it's too perfect, almost like it has no soul, like a copy made by a genius, not a masterpiece born from pain. In a room full of lies, the quietest man holds the loudest truth." Leo's words hung in the air between them, a fragile thread of truth in a tapestry of deceit. For a moment, Marcus Thorne forgot he was Arthur Finch, the weary traveller. He was simply Marcus the creator, the connoisseur, looking at a young man who saw with his soul, not just his eyes. He didn't offer a lengthy reply or a word of praise that might break the spell. He simply gave the boy a slow, deliberate nod, an acknowledgement that was more profound than any conversation. A silent pact was formed, in that look, one of shared perception. Leo, sensing the finality in the gesture, gave a small, respectful dip of his head and melted back into the shadows along the wall, leaving Marcus alone with the revelation. The auctioneer, a man whose voice was as polished and resonant as the mahogany of his gavel, moved on. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, Lot 42, a delightful mid-century piece by Dubois, playfully titled The Duke's Tuesday Cottage." The painting was displayed, a pleasant, if unremarkable, landscape. Marcus watched his focus returned as the ritual began anew. From a few rows ahead, he overheard the hushed, authoritative whisper of a woman dripping in emeralds to her companion. "Oh, it's a must-have, darling. The provenance is impeccable. It was in the Duke of Wellington's summer cottage, the one he supposedly only used on Tuesdays to escape the Duchess." Her companion chuckled a sound like ice cubes clinking in a crystal glass. The lie was so specific, so absurdly confident, that it became its own form of truth in this room. They weren't buying art, they were buying stories, and the more elaborate the story, the higher the price. The bidding for the Dubois was sluggish at first. Marcus saw Isabella poised at her lectern on the side of the stage, make a gesture so subtle it was nearly psychic. She tapped her fountain pen twice on her notes. Across the room, a man with silver hair who had been studiously examining his fingernails suddenly came to life, raising his paddle. 1.2 million, he declared, his voice injecting a false urgency into the proceedings. Marcus knew the type. A shill, a ghost bidder, paid by the house to inflate the value, to create the illusion of demand. The emerald-draped woman, now convinced of the piece's value, entered the fray. The price climbed. It was a flawless, predatory dance, and Isabella was its choreographer. As the gavel fell on another successful deception, Marcus's right hand, deep in the pocket of his worn coat, found the familiar weight of the silver pocket watch. It was heavy, its surface worn smooth by the ceaseless friction of his thumb over 15 years. Its hands were frozen, as they always were, at precisely 500. The watch wasn't a timepiece. It was a monument, a tombstone for a moment in his life when time had abruptly stopped. The scent of champagne and perfume faded, replaced by the smell of sawdust, turpentine, and molten metal. The hushed reverence of the auction house dissolved into the vibrant, chaotic energy of a sun-drenched workshop 15 years prior. He was 29, again hungry and brilliant, fueled by coffee and a boundless belief in the man who stood beside him. Jonathan Vance, Isabella's uncle, was more than a mentor. He was the father Marcus never had. He was a titan of innovation, and Marcus was his chosen apprentice. That afternoon, the sunlight had streamed through the large industrial windows, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the air like tiny golden spirits. Jonathan had placed the silver watch into his palm. It had shone then, new and full of promise. "A gentleman, Marcus, is never late," Jonathan had said, his voice a warm, paternal rumble. He had clapped Marcus on the shoulder, his eyes twinkling. "But an artist, an innovator. An innovator must own his time. This is for you. For the future we're going to build together. For when our names are spoken in the same breath as Edison and Tesla." Marcus had felt the future spooling out before him, a road paved with gold. He'd held the watch at steady, ticking a promise against his palm. The promise lasted less than a week. The memory shifted the color, draining away. The sunlit workshop was now cold and cavernous, empty. The prototypes were gone. The blueprints vanished. The patent applications he had drafted, meticulously detailing the revolutionary energy storage technology they had co-developed, were gone too. In their place on the main workbench was a single sheet of paper, a copy of a wire transfer receipt for a paltry sum and a hastily scrawled note. "This should be enough to get you started somewhere else. Some talents are meant to serve, not to lead. I'm sorry it had to be this way." He remembered the feeling, not of anger, not at first, but of a profound, hollow shock, as if the world had tilted on its axis and emptied him out. He had looked at the watch in his hand. Its silver face seemed to mock him, and as the full weight of the betrayal crashed down upon him, the ticking had stopped. Or perhaps he had stopped hearing it. It made no difference. Time had broken. It was 5 hours. He blinked, and the gilded hall of Vance Sovereign solidified around him once more. The memory didn't fade. It receded, leaving behind the familiar cold ache in his chest. But tonight it wasn't just an ache. It was fuel. The raw, desperate pain of that young man had been forged over 15 years into something harder, sharper. It had become a weapon of cold, calculating purpose. He lifted his gaze, looking past the chandeliers and the anonymous faces, and settled it on Isabella. She stood on the stage, a vision of untouchable grace, completely unaware of the ghost watching her from the back of the room. He saw her now, not just as a common fraud, but as the living embodiment of Jonathan's legacy, a legacy of brilliant, beautiful lies. She wore her uncle's treachery like a family crest. The need for justice, once a dull, persistent throb, was now a screaming imperative. This wasn't about money anymore. It had never been just about money. It was about reclaiming a stolen future. It was about making time start again. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his voice pulling Marcus fully into the present. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our penultimate offering this evening, before our spectacular finale." Marcus leaned forward slightly in his seat. The air grew thick with anticipation. He watched Isabella on the stage, her smile bright, her eyes cold. She was a queen presiding over her court, serenely confident, completely oblivious that the man she had dismissed an hour ago was now finally ready to make his move. In the theatre of the rich, the most dangerous man is the one who refuses to play his part. The penultimate painting, a chaotic splash of abstract color, sold for a respectable $3 million to a woman who applauded with the polite, measured enthusiasm of someone who had just successfully purchased a new set of tires. A ripple of polite applause followed the sound, absorbed by the heavy velvet curtains and the sheer density of wealth in the room. Then a hush fell. The air itself seemed to change, growing thicker with a shared, unspoken anticipation. The main event had arrived. 2 attendants in white gloves, moving with the solemnity of priests, carried a large covered canvas to the center of the stage. The auctioneer, a man named Sterling, whose silver hair and booming baritone were as much a part of the Vance Sovereign brand as the marble floors allowed the silence to stretch, building the moment. And now Sterling's voice resonated rich with theatrical gravity, the crown jewel of the Ellingsworth collection. a piece unseen by the public for nearly a century. A painting whispered about in the most exclusive circles, thought lost to time, but rediscovered in a moment of pure serendipity. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you The Dreamer's Dusk. The velvet cover was swept away. The painting was magnificent. It depicted a coastline at sunset, but the colors were impossibly vivid, a fever dream of crimson gold and deep aching violet. The brushwork was flawless, the composition heart-stoppingly beautiful. A collective sigh of admiration swept through the hall. It was to the untrained eye a perfect masterpiece. To Marcus, it was the most beautiful lie he had ever seen. Isabella Vance stepped forward, basking in the painting's reflected glory. Her posture was regal, her expression one of profound, almost spiritual reverence. She was not merely a seller of objects. She was a curator of dreams, a high priestess of desire. "What you see before you," she began, her voice, a soft, compelling melody, "is more than paint on canvas. It is the final, desperate cry of a soul in turmoil. The artist, as many of you know, painted this in the last weeks of his life, secluded in a coastal cottage, his heart broken, but his spirit defiant. You can feel his pain in the violets, his last flicker of hope in the gold. To own this painting is to own a piece of that beautiful, tragic soul." It was a brilliant performance. She was selling them the story she had commissioned, the emotion she had manufactured. Marcus felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. She spoke of soul, but the only thing she truly understood was the art of the transaction. Sterling let her words hang in the air for a perfect beat before raising his gavel. "We have had unprecedented interest in this piece. We shall start the bidding at a conservative $10 million. The room erupted, not in noise, but in a flurry of silent, decisive gestures. Paddles shot up, a man in the front row, a woman near the center, one of Isabella's known associates, a gallery owner from Zurich. 11 million. 12. A nod from a phone bidder, relayed by a staff member. 14 million. The numbers climbed with dizzying speed, a testament to Isabella's perfectly orchestrated hype. The energy was real infectious, even if its foundation was a lie. The bidding slowed, then paused at a staggering $18 million, the bid held by a shipping magnate known for his aggressive acquisitions. Sterling scanned the room. $18 million with Mr. Alistair. Do I hear 19? Silence. The magnate allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. And then from the shadowed alcove in the back, a voice emerged. It was quiet, a little reedy, utterly out of place. $18,050,000. It was Arthur Finch. It was Marcus. If a bomb had been detonated, the effect could not have been more profound. A wave of stunned silence was followed by a ripple of disbelief. A man in the third row let out a short, choked cough that sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. Heads swiveled eyes, searching for the source of the absurd interruption. Whispers broke out like wildfire. "Who said that? Is he serious? On stage?" Isabella's serene mask didn't just crack, it shattered. For a single, unguarded second, her face was a canvas of pure, undiluted fury. Her blue eyes, moments before cool and placid, flashed with fire. Then, with a visible effort of will, she reassembled her composure, but the smile she fixed on her face was brittle sharp at the edges. She picked up a microphone, her knuckles white. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with a lethally sweet condescension, as if addressing a toddler who had wandered into a board meeting. "I appreciate your enthusiasm. Truly. However, this is Vance Sovereign. The minimum bidding increment at this level is $100,000. She gave a small, indulgent laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "This isn't a flea market." The room chuckled along with her. the tension breaking into open mockery. Marcus played his part to perfection. He looked flustered, his shoulders slumping. He clutched his catalogue like a shield. "Oh," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Oh, I do apologize. It's all I have." The magnate who held the bid smirked, turning to his companion with a dismissive shrug. Isabella's smile widened. She had successfully turned the interruption into a moment of comic relief, reinforcing her own status and the intruder's foolishness. She nodded discreetly to a security guard near the back wall, but before the guard could take a single step, another voice, calm, clear, and resonant with effortless authority, cut through the lingering titters. It came from the front, from a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit whom no one had paid much attention to until now. $20 million. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The magnate's smirk vanished. Isabella froze her hand halfway to gesturing the security guard forward. The man in the charcoal suit, Marcus's lawyer, Mr. Davies, stood up slowly. He wasn't looking at Isabella. He was addressing Sterling the auctioneer. Then he added his voice, a dry, ironic counterpoint to the drama. "And as an act of patronage for the arts, my client would also like to sponsor the gentleman's $50 contribution. We believe all levels of passion should be encouraged." The room was utterly silent. No one knew what to make of the scene. The ridiculous old man in the back was somehow connected to this new, impossibly powerful player. The hunter had become the benefactor. The joke had become a threat. Marcus remained seated in his shadowy corner, his expression unchanged. But inside, he felt the first satisfying click of his trap being sprung. He looked at Isabella on the stage. Her face was a storm of confusion, fury, and for the first time that night, a flicker of genuine, unadulterated fear. The script had been torn to pieces, and she had no idea who the new author was. The deepest cuts are not made with a knife, but with a memory. We will now take a brief 15-minute intermission before commencing the final bidding for The Dreamer's Dusk, Sterling's voice announced, but it was barely heard over the electric buzz that had seized the room. The auction hall had transformed from a place of commerce into a hotbed of frantic speculation. Who was the man in the charcoal suit? What was his connection to the disruptive old fool in the back? The air, once thick with polite ambition, was now charged with the raw energy of a mystery. Marcus didn't wait for the whispers to find him. He slipped from his seat in the alcove, melting into the flow of people heading toward the champagne bar, and then veered left away from the crowd. He sought refuge not in a drink, but in silence. He entered an adjacent gallery, a long, quiet hall, panelled in dark wood. The portraits here were older, more severe, stern-faced patriarchs and their unsmiling wives, their painted eyes holding the weight of forgotten dynasties. The air was cool and still. He stopped before a portrait of a long-dead industrialist, a man with a severe beard and eyes that seemed to judge the world for its lack of discipline. But Marcus wasn't seeing the painting. He was seeing the chessboard, arranging the pieces in his mind for the next move. He had successfully sown chaos. He had established his proxy as a formidable, unpredictable force. Now he needed to withstand the Queen's counterattack. He knew it was coming. The sharp, purposeful click of heels on marble announced her arrival long before she appeared. Isabella Vance entered the gallery, not with the fluid grace she displayed for the public, but with the rigid posture of a predator stalking its prey. The mask of the charming hostess was gone, leaving behind the sharp, calculating angles of her true face. She stopped a few feet behind him. "That was quite a performance," she said. Her voice was no longer a melody. It was a low, dangerous stiletto. An amusing one. "But the game is over. Tell me who your benefactor is." No one spends $20 million on a whim, especially not for a charity case. Marcus kept his eyes on the painted industrialist playing his part. He let out a soft, weary sigh. As I said, I have no idea. A kind soul, perhaps. The world still has them, you know. Don't play the fool with me, she snapped, taking a step closer. I own this room. I own this night. Nothing happens here that I don't control. Her arrogance was a tangible force, pressing in on him. It was then that her eyes, sharp and accustomed to cataloguing every detail of value, narrowed. They fixed on the thin silver chain that looped from his waistcoat pocket. Her professional curiosity, the need to solve the puzzle of the mysterious bidder, suddenly evaporated, replaced by something else, entirely, something colder, darker. That watch, she breathed the words of venomous hiss. She moved to his side, her gaze locked on the sliver of silver. My God, I'd recognize that gaudy, sentimental piece of junk anywhere. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the ghosts of a shared, poisoned history. My Uncle Jonathan gave one just like it to his little pet project years ago. She continued her voice, dripping with a story she had told herself. So many times it had become her gospel. The ungrateful apprentice, the boy he pulled from nothing and gave everything to. The one who in the end tried to steal his life's work right out from under him. She looked at Marcus's face, now searching for a reaction, enjoying the power of her narrative. You knew him, didn't you? An old associate of a failure. Perhaps she taunted. Marcus remained silent, his stillness a stark contrast to her agitated energy. His silence was a canvas, and she eagerly filled it with the ugly colors of her family's lies. My uncle, she said, her voice, taking on a tone of feigned tragedy, was a genius, but his flaw was his generosity. He saw potential in a boy who had nothing, and he tried to lift him up. He gave him access to his labs, his research, his very soul. And how was he repaid? With theft. The boy thought he could take 15 years of my uncle's research and call it his own. She circled him slowly, her words circling him too, tightening like a noose. He was lucky my uncle was so merciful. Jonathan could have destroyed him, buried him in lawsuits until he was nothing but dust. But he didn't. He just cut him loose, fired him, gave him a little money and sent the charity case back to the gutter where he belonged. And this, she gestured at the watch with a flick of her wrist, is what the little thief clung to. A reminder of the man he tried and failed to ruin. How pathetic. Every word was a carefully chosen weapon, honed by years of family resentment and polished with privilege. She thought she was kicking a man who was already down a forgotten relic connected to another forgotten failure. The cruelty was effortless, the enjoyment of it radiating from her like a fever. She was her uncle's niece in every way that mattered. She finished her tirade and stood waiting, expecting him to flinch, to argue, to show some sign that her words had hit their mark. For a long, ringing moment, there was only the sound of their breathing in the quiet hall. Then slowly, Marcus Thorne turned to face her. The transformation was absolute. The weary, stooped shoulders of Arthur Finch straightened. The timid, downcast eyes were gone, replaced by a gaze that was perfectly calm, immensely old, and as cold and clear as deep water. The man looking at her now was not a victim. He was a reckoning. There was no anger on his face, no hint of the wound she had so viciously tried to reopen. There was only a terrifying, placid stillness. He let the silence hang for another beat, forcing her to endure the full weight of his new presence. Her smug superiority began to curdle into confusion, then into a prickle of genuine unease. This was not the reaction she had expected. Finally he spoke. His voice was not the reedy, hesitant tone of Arthur Finch. It was a quiet, resonant baritone that seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. "He did teach me one valuable lesson, your Uncle Marcus," said softly. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Isabella's face. "And what's that?" she asked, her own voice, a little less steady than before. Marcus held her gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of something that might have been a smile or a promise touched the corner of his mouth. "Never trust something that looks perfect." "On the outside," he said, his eyes flicking for a split second toward the main hall, where the flawless, fraudulent painting was waiting. A beautiful frame, he finished his gaze, returning to her, "can hide a world of rot." He didn't wait for her response. He simply turned and walked out of the gallery, his footsteps measured and silent on the marble floor. He left her standing alone amongst the portraits of dead men, her heart suddenly pounding with a nameless dread. She had come to intimidate a ghost, but she had the chilling, unshakable feeling that she had just provoked a titan. In a world of noise, the bravest acts are often a whisper. Leo didn't hear the words exchanged in the quiet gallery, but he didn't need to. From his vantage point, partially obscured by a towering bronze sculpture of a falling angel, he had seen the exchange as a silent film of pure emotion. He saw Isabella Vance, his brilliant, formidable boss, radiate a venom that seemed to curdle the air around her. He saw the old man, Arthur Finch, absorb that venom without flinching his stillness, a form of defiance so profound it was terrifying. And he saw the moment the power shifted, when the old man turned his entire presence transformed, leaving Isabella looking not like a queen, but like a courtier who had just been told the throne was a lie. His intuition, the same quiet hum that had told him the masterpiece was soulless, was now a screaming siren in his mind. This wasn't just a tense moment. This was a fracture, a crack running through the polished facade of Vance Sovereign, and he was standing right on top of it. He could walk away. His shift was over. He could collect his meager intern's pay, go back to his tiny apartment, and forget the entire night. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. Getting involved in the battles of titans was how mortals got crushed. But as he turned to leave, another image surfaced in his mind, unbidden. It was from earlier that day, a detail that had seemed insignificant, a minor logistical oddity. He had been tasked with helping the head curator, a fussy, perpetually stressed man named Alistair, with the final preparation of the Dreamer's Dusk. He remembered the original frame. It was a magnificent thing, centuries old, carved from dark, heavy wood, its gilded corners worn smooth with time. He had watched confused as two technicians had carefully, painstakingly removed the canvas from that historic frame, a precaution Alistair had explained, noticing Leo's puzzled look. "The old wood is too fragile for the tensions of the display easel. We've had a perfect museum-grade replica made for tonight, for structural integrity." At the time, the explanation felt thin. He'd watched them fit the masterpiece into the new frame. It was a perfect copy visually, but it lacked the character, the very history of the original. The old frame, a work of art in its own right, was simply wrapped in cheesecloth and set against a wall in the storage vault forgotten. Why would you separate a soul from its body? Just for a few hours on a stage, it didn't make sense. And now, after seeing the confrontation in the gallery, that small, nagging inconsistency felt like a crucial blinking light on a control panel full of warnings. He made his choice. Fear was a cold, heavy thing in his stomach, but the thought of staying silent, of letting that dissonant note go unquestioned, was heavier. He had to tell someone, and the only person who seemed to exist outside of Isabella's carefully controlled orbit, the only person who had made her mask of composure slip, was the strange, quiet old man. He found him not in the main hall, but in a small, seldom-used library off the West Gallery. The room smelled of old paper and leather polish. Marcus was standing at a tall, arched window, looking out at the endless, silent expanse of the snow-covered Alps, a dark silhouette against the deep blue of the twilight. He seemed perfectly at peace, a man drinking in a moment of quiet contemplation, a stark contrast to the buzzing tension of the auction house. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Finch, I'm so sorry to disturb you." Marcus turned from the window. His eyes in the dim light of the library seemed to hold a universe of secrets. His expression was unreadable but not unkind. "Leo," he said, his voice calm. "It's no disturbance." The boy took a hesitant step forward, clutching the strap of his messenger bag. "Sir, I don't know if this is anything, and please tell me if I'm overstepping. But something has been bothering me all day. It's about the painting. The Dreamer's Dusk." Marcus remained silent, his stillness an invitation for Leo to continue. The frame, Leo said the words tumbling out now in a nervous rush. "They swapped it out this morning. They took the canvas out of its original antique frame and put it in a brand new replica. The curator said it was for structural integrity, but the new frame, it came from a private fabrication company I've never heard of, not one of our usual art restorers. And the original frame is just sitting in the vault. Sir, it doesn't make sense. It's like taking the original binding off a first edition Gutenberg Bible and putting it in a plastic sleeve. You just don't do it." He finally ran out of breath, his earnest face fraught with worry. He had laid his cards on the table, exposing his career to a man he didn't know. Marcus listened to the entire story without a single interruption. His gaze was so intense, so focused, that Leo felt as though he were being X-rayed. Then a slow, thoughtful expression crossed the old man's face. He stroked his chin, a gesture that seemed almost comically professorial. "Good heavens," Marcus said, his Arthur Finch persona returning for a moment, a flicker of theatricality in the dim light. "The plot, as they say, thickens like poorly made gravy." The unexpected phrase was so absurd, it momentarily broke Leo's tension, and he let out a nervous laugh. Marcus's expression then softened the gentle humor, fading into something more serious, more profound. He looked at Leo, and for the first time he dropped the act entirely. The reedy quality in his voice was gone, replaced by the quiet, resonant baritone from the gallery. "You have good instincts, Leo," he said, "better than anyone else in this building. You were right to question it, and you were right to come to me." The simple validation washed over Leo like a warm wave, extinguishing his fear and replacing it with a powerful sense of purpose. "Your shift is over." Marcus continued, his voice now carrying a tone of gentle but absolute command. "I want you to go home now. Don't speak to anyone about what you told me. Don't look back. Just leave through the staff exit. Your work here tonight is done, and it was more important than you will ever know." He took a step closer, placing a hand briefly on the young man's shoulder. The gesture felt surprisingly heavy, paternal. "This place," he added, his voice low, "it can be more dangerous than it looks. Be safe." Leo understood. This was not a request. It was a dismissal for his own protection. He nodded, his mind reeling, but his path suddenly clear. "Yes, sir," he whispered. He turned and walked out of the library, not looking back, a sense of awe and a healthy dose of fear propelling him forward. Marcus watched him go, then turned back to the window. The final piece of the puzzle had just been handed to him. The frame. Of course, it was a modern fabrication, a shell, a vessel, the perfect place to hide a microdot, containing the digital ledger of Isabella's entire fraudulent enterprise. The alliance was forged, the silent hero was safe, and the titan in the library, armed with the truth, was now ready for the final act of the play. Money is not the prize. It is the weapon. The 15-minute intermission felt like an eternity to the assembled crowd and a mere heartbeat to the two silent combatants. When the chime sounded, calling the patrons back to their seats, the atmosphere in the grand hall had irrevocably changed. The polite social buzz was gone, replaced by a sharp electric tension, the kind of focused silence that precedes a lightning strike. Every eye was on the stage, every mind consumed by a single question: what would happen next? Isabella Vance resumed her position at the lectern, a marble eagle returning to its eyrie. She had used the intermission to reconstruct her flawless facade, but a new, dangerous light glittered in her eyes. The unsettling encounter with the old man had shaken her, but fear in a creature like Isabella quickly metabolized into a purer, more potent fuel rage. She would not be challenged in her own domain. She would reassert her dominance, and she would make this impudent, mysterious bidder pay, in every sense of the word. Across the room, Marcus settled back into his shadowed alcove. He was perfectly still a rock in the churning sea of speculation. In the front row, his lawyer, Mr. Davies, adjusted his tie, his expression as placid as if he were waiting for a train. The board was set. The final bloody phase of the game was about to begin. Sterling the auctioneer let the silence build before his voice boomed through the hall. We now resume the bidding for the extraordinary, the Dreamer's Dusk. The current bid stands at $20 million with paddle number 88. He looked expectantly at the crowd. The response was immediate. The Swiss gallery owner, one of Isabella's most reliable shills, raised his paddle without hesitation. 21 million, Mr. Davies countered with a lazy, almost indifferent lift of his own paddle. 22. 23, snapped a woman in the second row, another of Isabella's pawns. The bidding war was no longer an open field. It had become a brutal, focused duel. The rest of the room, including the shipping magnate, who had been so confident moments before, had fallen silent. They were now merely spectators at a match being played at a level far beyond their own. The numbers climbed in a relentless, punishing rhythm, each bid a volley fired across the silent room. 25 million, 26, 28. Near the back, one of the seasoned art dealers Marcus had noticed earlier leaned toward his companion, his face a mask of disbelief. "This is madness," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "This isn't an auction, it's a declaration of war." For that price, I'd expect the artist himself to rise from the grave and offer a personal letter of thanks. The price climbed to 30 million, the bid resting with Mr. Davies. The number hung in the air, a figure so immense it seemed to have its own gravitational pull. Even in this room, $30 million was a staggering sum. A nervous pause descended. Sterling looked to the Swiss gallery owner. The man looking toward Isabella for his cue gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He was out. For a moment it seemed to be over. But Marcus knew better. He watched Isabella. Her expression was a calm, frozen lake, but he could see the furious calculations happening beneath the surface. The price had already exceeded the most optimistic projections, guaranteeing her a massive profit and successfully laundering the initial investment. A sane person would stop, but the encounter in the gallery had changed the stakes. This was no longer about profit. It was about ego. It was about crushing the insolent force that had dared to challenge her. She gave a tiny, almost invisible nod to a man seated alone in the fourth row, a man no one had noticed until now. He was her final piece, a proxy for a shell corporation she controlled directly. This was her own money she was now throwing into the fire, a desperate gamble to maintain control. "31 million, the man called out, his voice flat and emotionless. Mr. Davies didn't flinch. He responded before Sterling could even acknowledge the new bid. 32. His calmness was an act of aggression in itself. 33. Isabella's proxy shot back. The pace became a frantic, dizzying blur. The numbers lost all meaning, becoming abstract weapons hurled across the room. 34. 35. The collective gasp of the audience was the only sound accompanying the auctioneer's call. The bid was with Isabella's proxy. The entire room, it seemed, was holding its breath. Sterling turned his gaze to Mr. Davies. $35 million, a truly historic figure. "Do I hear 36? Mr. Davies didn't respond immediately. He took a moment to adjust his cufflink, a small, infuriatingly calm gesture. Then he gave a slight, almost weary nod. 35 million, he said, his voice clear and steady. 500,000. He had broken the rhythm. By bidding in a smaller, more precise increment, he had seized control of the pace of the duel. It was a classic auction house power move, a signal that said, "I am not just reacting to you. I am now dictating the terms of your surrender." Isabella's composure finally broke. A tremor of shock, of disbelief ran through her. Her opponent wasn't just wealthy, he was strategic. He was playing a different game, and she had just realized she didn't know the rules. She shot a wild, desperate look at her proxy. The man stared back, awaiting an order that did not come. She had reached her limit. Sterling, sensing the end, raised his polished gavel. $35,500,000, he intoned, milking the moment for all its dramatic worth. Going once, the silence was absolute. Going twice. Isabella's face was a pale, frozen mask of fury. Sold, the crack of the gavel was like a rifle shot echoing through the grand hall. To our bidder in the front row, paddle number 88. A wave of astonished chatter and exhaled breaths swept the room. It was over. On her lectern, Isabella's face cycled through a storm of emotions in a split second. There was the raw, primal fury of being publicly bested. But then it was gone, replaced by something else. A new smile formed on her lips, a cold, sharp, calculating smile of secret victory. She had lost the painting, yes, but she had won. The mysterious bidder was now the owner of a worthless, albeit beautiful forgery, and she was $35 million richer, the money scrubbed clean through a legitimate high-profile transaction. She had taken the hit to her ego, but she had walked away with the prize. She had had the last laugh. Her composure fully restored, she stepped to the center of the stage, her bearing once again regal and triumphant. An absolutely electrifying moment in auction history, she said, her voice smooth as silk. My sincerest congratulations to our winning bidder. She scanned the front row, her eyes landing on Mr. Davies. Would the representative for paddle number 88 please join us on stage to be recognized for this historic acquisition? She was ready to greet her vanquished foe, to shake his hand, to look him in the eye, and savor the depth of his foolishness. The stage was set. The trap had been sprung. She was in complete control, or so she thought. The truth does not shout. It arrives. Isabella's smile was a beacon of triumphant grace, a dazzling display for the room she had just conquered. Would the representative for paddle number 88 please join us on stage to be recognized for this historic acquisition? She called out, her gaze fixed on the man in the charcoal suit. The entire audience, a single organism, moved by curiosity, turned to look at Mr. Davies. But the lawyer didn't move. He simply stood, a picture of quiet deference, and turned his own head slightly, his gaze directed toward the back of the room. It was a small, simple gesture, but it held the power to redirect the attention of every person in the hall. Hundreds of heads, adorned with jewels and styled with expensive precision, swiveled in unison, following his line of sight. They searched the shadows of the rear alcove, their faces a canvas of confusion. Isabella's smile wavered, the brilliant facade faltering as a crack of uncertainty appeared. From those shadows a figure emerged, stepping into the soft light of the main aisle. It was the old man, Arthur Finch. A low, confused murmur rippled through the crowd. What was this? A joke, a stunt. The man was an interruption, a piece of social debris. He had no part to play in this grand finale. But as he began to walk the long path from the back of the hall to the stage, a strange and powerful transformation took place. It began with his shoulders. The weary, apologetic stoop that had defined him seemed to melt away, replaced by a straight, powerful line. His stride, once a timid shuffle on the marble floor, became a measured, deliberate, and undeniably confident gait. His head, previously bowed in deference, lifted. The man who had entered the room as a ghost was now walking toward them as a king. With every step he shed the skin of Arthur Finch, and the titan beneath began to emerge. The air grew still once more this time, not with anticipation, but with a profound, unnerving awe. He reached the short set of stairs leading to the stage and ascended them without breaking stride. He did not stop beside Isabella, as a grateful recipient might. He walked to the center of the stage and stood opposite her, a dark, immovable object meeting a force that had until this moment believed itself to be unstoppable. The silence was absolute, heavy and fragile. Isabella stared at him, her mind a frantic storm of disbelief, trying to reconcile the bumbling old man from the gallery with the formidable presence that now confronted her. What she began, her voice, losing its silky cadence, now sharp and brittle, is the meaning of this. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, his eyes holding hers, and in them she saw no trace of the timid Arthur Finch. She saw only an immense, ancient calm. Then he turned his gaze to the stunned audience and calmly took the microphone from its stand. His voice, when he spoke, was not the reedy tone he had used before. It was the quiet, resonant baritone from their private confrontation, now amplified, filling every corner of the vast hall. "My name," he said, the words clear, simple and devastating, "is Marcus Thorne." The name fell into the silent room like a boulder into a frozen lake, shattering the surface into a million pieces. A collective audible gasp swept the hall. Marcus Thorne, the legend, the recluse, the architect of a technological empire, a man whose net worth was a subject of myth and whose face had not been seen publicly in over a decade. On the stage the blood drained from Isabella's face. The confident smile, the mask of composed power. It all dissolved, leaving behind a raw, primal horror. Her mind reeled, replaying every moment of the night, every word of condescension, every act of public humiliation, now recast in a terrifying new light. Before she could form a single word, before her shattered composure could even begin to reassemble, he spoke again, his voice still unnervingly calm. "I am the sole owner of the holding company that acquired Vance Sovereign 6 months ago." He continued, his gaze sweeping over the audience before landing once again on her. "This building, the art on its walls, the name above the door, and until a few moments ago, your employment." He let that final word hang in the air, a guillotine suspended over her career. Then he turned his attention to the beautiful, fraudulent painting on its easel. "I want to thank you all for attending this rather spectacular demonstration this evening," he said. "You have been part of a very expensive, very educational piece of performance art." His eyes found Mr. Davies in the front row, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "You see, this painting, The Dreamer's Dusk, is a masterful forgery. a beautiful soulless lie commissioned by Miss Vance herself and seeded into the market to be the crown jewel of her laundering operation. The murmurs in the room exploded into a roar of shock and outrage. Isabella stood frozen, a statue carved from ice. But its true value, Marcus's voice, cut through the noise, silencing the room once more, is not in the paint. It is in the frame. He walked over to the painting, his movements deliberate. A modern fabrication, expertly aged, but designed with a hollowed-out compartment, shielded from scans. And inside it? He paused, letting the full weight of his final revelation land. Is a solid-state drive. One that contains the complete, unedited, and encrypted financial records of Ms. Vance's entire enterprise for the past 2 years. At that precise moment, as if summoned by his words, the grand double doors at the entrance of the hall swung open. Mr. Davies stepped inside, and behind him filed a calm, organized team of 6 men and women in sharp business suits, forensic accountants and private security, all on Marcus's personal payroll. They moved with quiet, professional efficiency, securing the exits and flanking the stage. The theater had become a courtroom. Marcus turned back to Isabella. Her face was a ruin, her eyes wide with the terror of a cornered animal. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and slowly drew out the silver pocket watch. He didn't look at it. He looked only at her. He held it up slightly, the tarnished silver catching the stage lights. My mentor, your uncle, taught me a great deal about the value of time, he said, his voice now soft, almost conversational, a chilling counterpoint to the ruin he had just unleashed. He stopped mine for 15 years. He let his hand fall to his side, the watch still clutched within it. His eyes held no malice, no triumph, only a vast, cold, and inescapable finality. Tonight, he said, I am simply returning the favor. Your time is up. As 2 of his security team members began to move towards the frozen, shattered figure of Isabella Vance Marcus, stood motionless on the stage, a ghost no more, but a silent king who had at long last reclaimed his stolen kingdom. Time once broken can be made to tick again. The chaos that followed was a quiet, suffocating thing. There was no screaming, no undignified struggle. Isabella Vance, stripped of her power and authority, in a single devastating moment, seemed to shrink before their very eyes. The radiant, untouchable queen of the art world became just a woman in an expensive dress, her face a pale, vacant mask of shock as 2 of Marcus's security personnel, a man and a woman, with polite but unyielding expressions, escorted her from the stage. She did not look back. The crowd remained frozen, a tableau of stunned disbelief. These were people for whom the world operated on a set of predictable rules, rules governed by wealth, status, and influence. Tonight, a ghost had walked out of the past and proven that all of their rules were fragile illusions. Marcus stepped back to the microphone, his presence commanding the silent, cavernous room. His voice when he spoke was not that of a victor gloating over a vanquished enemy. It was the calm, resolute tone of a founder setting his house in order. My apologies to our legitimate patrons and collectors here tonight, he said, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. You came here in good faith and were met with deception. Effective immediately, Vance Sovereign will be temporarily closed. We will be conducting a full, transparent audit of every transaction from the past 3 years. Every slight, every fraud will be made right. He paused, letting the weight of the promise settle. When these doors reopen, they will represent a new standard of integrity. That is my word. He gave a final formal nod, and with that, the play was over. People began to stir, talking in hushed, urgent tones, their minds racing to process the seismic shift they had just witnessed. They moved toward the exits, not with the buoyant energy of a post-gala crowd, but with the sober gravity of witnesses leaving a courtroom. Amid the quiet exodus, Marcus scanned the room, his eyes searching for one person. He found him standing near the now empty stage, looking small and overwhelmed against the backdrop of the massive, fraudulent painting. Leo was watching the forensic team, who were now carefully beginning to dismantle the frame, his face a mixture of awe, terror, and dawning comprehension. Marcus made his way through the thinning crowd, approaching the young man quietly. "Leo," he said, his voice gentle. Leo startled, turning to face him. He looked at the man before him, the legendary Marcus Thorne, and could still see the ghost of the kind, weary Arthur Finch he had tried to help. "Mr. Thorne," he stammered. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Marcus replied. "Tonight you listened to something more valuable than any expert opinion. You listened to your own instinct." He took a step closer. "I need to ask you something. Why did you come to me? You could have lost everything." Leo swallowed his gaze, earnest. "I don't know, sir. It's just what you see on the surface." He gestured vaguely at the opulent room. "It's not always the most important part. That painting. It felt wrong. And Miss Vance's reaction to you? That felt wrong too. I guess I just believed that the quiet man in the corner was more honest than the loud pronouncements on the stage." Marcus held the young man's gaze. In a room full of people trained to see value, he said slowly, "You were the only one who looked for the truth. That is a rare commodity, Leo. A resource more valuable than anything sold here tonight." He saw the future in that moment, not just of his company, but of his legacy. It wouldn't be built on cold transactions and ruthless acquisitions. It would be built on the very quality this young man possessed in abundance. "I am restructuring my entire philanthropic foundation," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a new purpose. "It oversees billions in charitable grants, art preservation, and educational programs. But it's become too corporate, too detached. It lacks a soul. I'm creating a new position, a director of ethical oversight. Someone to be my eyes and ears, to ensure our work is guided by principle, not just by profit. Someone to look past the perfect frames and see the real picture." He paused. "The position is yours if you want it." Leo stared at him, his mind unable to process the scale of the offer. His world had just been tilted on its axis. From intern to director, from fetching water to overseeing billions, the immensity of it was crushing, exhilarating, and utterly terrifying. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His mind grasped for a single solid thought in the whirlwind. Finally he found one. He asked, his voice a near whisper of disbelief. "Does this come with dental?" For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a genuine, unburdened smile broke across Marcus Thorne's face. It was followed by a low, warm chuckle. The sound was so unexpected, so human, that it seemed to finally break the spell of the long, cold night. "Yes, Leo," he said. "It comes with exceptional dental." Weeks later, the world was a different place. The scandal at Vance Sovereign had erupted across the news, a story of high society fraud that captivated the public. Isabella Vance, along with several of her key associates, was facing a slate of federal charges, her beautiful world dismantled into a series of grim legal filings. But in Marcus Thorne's private study, the world was quiet. The room was filled with books, schematics for new projects, and the warm light of a desk lamp. On a simple, elegant easel before him stood the true, the dreamer's dusk. It wasn't perfect. Up close, you could see the faint cracks of age in the paint. the slight imperfections in the brushstrokes that betrayed the artist's humanity, his pain and his hope. It had a soul. From a velvet-lined drawer in his desk, Marcus took out the silver pocket watch. He held it in his palm, its weight familiar, its silence a long-held companion. He looked at the hands frozen for 15 years at the hour of his greatest wound. He thought of the betrayal, but the memory no longer had its sharp cutting edge. He thought of the auction of Isabella's downfall, and he thought of Leo now hard at work, his earnest integrity, a new bright beacon in Marcus's world. With a quiet, decisive movement, he turned the small crown on the top of the watch. There was a faint click, a whir of ancient, intricate gears re-engaging, and then a sound he had not heard in a decade and a half. Tick, tock. A soft, steady rhythm filling the silence of the room. He placed the watch on the polished surface of his desk, its gentle pulse a quiet affirmation. He looked from the ticking watch to the masterpiece on the easel, and a deep, profound sense of peace settled over him. The ghosts were quiet. The sun was rising, and for Marcus Thorne, time had finally started again. They say time heals all wounds. But what happens when time itself is the wound, a clock stopped dead by a single shattering moment of betrayal? Marcus Thorne's journey wasn't just about the brilliant execution of justice. It was about what comes after the reckoning. After the ghosts of the past have been silenced, what fills the quiet vengeance is an ending, but healing is a beginning. And perhaps the greatest victory isn't found in watching an enemy fall, but in finding the courage to finally wind the clock forward again. It lies in the choice to build, to trust, and to believe that a new chapter is worth writing even when the ink from the last one has stained your hands. We would be honored to hear your own reflections on this in the comments below. If this story of quiet strength and profound healing resonated with you, a simple like helps it find others who may need to hear it. And by subscribing, you join a community that believes true power is not just about winning the battle, but about what you choose to do with the peace. Thank you for your time. Until the next story, be well.